All right. Hello and welcome to Primordial Threads. We're here today with Kira Ryberg to talk about zodiacal releasing.
Yes.
Hi.
Kira, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and talk about your practice a bit?
No. Yeah, no, of course. I just never know what to say for these things.
I know.
But yeah, my name is Kira Ryberg. I'm an astrologer. I practice mainly Hellenistic astrology, but I do natal and electional, and have recently kind of gotten a little bit into teaching, making some lectures. I really love to do like work with zodiacal releasing, which is like going to be a big thing that we focus on in this episode. And yeah, I guess that's kind of what I'm about.
Yeah, no, Kira, I have been following for a long time on Twitter. And when we did niche, Kira was one of our participants as well. You will see this is a common theme with many of our guests. But she was super supportive throughout it, and we are so excited to have her on today to talk about something that she is very well versed in, which is zodiacal releasing. And we wanted to have her on today to kind of go into the Lot of Eros, because I feel like a lot of us, when we start diving into ZR, fortune and spirits where we kind of start, as you should. But I have seen a lot of questions about Eros and how it plays into relationships and synastry. And I know it goes even beyond that. So super excited to dive into that today. Let's see. In my location, it is 10:30 a.m. on Sunday, September 11th. I have a Scorpio rising at 4 degrees, which is fun. We're going to be diving deep, as we should. And let's see. Let's just start with a very basic question for you is, what is zodiacal releasing?
Yeah, so it's an ancient Time Lord technique. So it essentially gives you like kind of ways to break down your life into chunks of time. And from there, you can kind of see if they're going to be, more positive, more challenging, if they're going to be more important. And it can help you kind of, navigate the ebbs and flows of, challenging situations in your life versus really great situations. It can kind of explain your relationship to like those ebbs and flows as well, which is one of my favorite parts of zodiacal releasing. But yeah, it basically breaks down your life into like chapters of a book is the common metaphor that is used. And then you've got different levels. So there's like, well, now I think there's like 8 levels if you're using Astrology, which is wild. It will take you down to the seconds. But most people usually just use like the first 4 levels or the first 5 levels. And so if you want to use, the book metaphor, then it's like the chapters, the, pages, paragraphs, sentences, and the words on the page are kind of what you're looking at there. And it can give you, a good idea of like what that narrative of your entire life looks like.
That is so cool. How did you like come into zodiacal releasing? Like, how did you gravitate towards that?
Yeah, well, I was really like, a Chris Brennan stan when I started my
Yes.
well, still am.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. When I
We love
started
you, Chris.
my like astrology journey, I watched like a lot of like the astrology podcasts and stuff. And then when I wanted to take, proper courses and like really dive in, I was like, I have to take Chris's Hellenistic course just because I'm like a Saturn ruled 9th house. Like I like to do the traditional, like, like I want to know the history where this all comes from kind of thing. And so I took his course, and in his course, there's an 18-hour kind of lecture on zodiacal releasing. It's absolutely wild. Yeah, there's so many example charts. There's literally like over 100 example charts, and it goes through just so many different lives, so many different contexts. And then before that, I'd also watched, like that YouTube, there's like that famous 4-hour long YouTube video. That's like the intro to the 18-hour.
Wow.
So that was kind of how I got started with it, was just through like Chris's stuff, and then using it like all the time in my own life and with clients. And I just was so impressed by it that it was like one of those first things, we all have different things that just grab us in astrology, and that grabbed me, and it hasn't ungrabbed.
I love that.
Yeah.
So I guess to get a little bit more technical with it, how do we get into calculating the zodiacal releasing?
Yeah. So basically it uses the lots, which kind of Hannah already touched on, like the lot of fortune, a lot of spirit, a lot of eros, or there's hundreds of different lots that you could use for this technique. And essentially every lot is going to be in a sign, just like a planet is. And that sign kind of acts as like a marker or a starting point. And all of the signs have a planet that rules them and a number of like minor years associated with the planet. And that kind of determines the length of the time period. And so it's a little complicated to try to explain without just like looking at your timeline in front of you. But so say if you have like your lot of fortune in Capricorn, then the minor years associated with Capricorn are 27, or if you don't know that, now you do. So the first 27 years of your life from the lot of fortune is going to be Capricorn, ruled by Saturn. And then you would move into the subsequent sign, which is Aquarius, and that would be 30 years. And those are different just because of the distance between the sun and the moon. For Capricorn and Aquarius, kind of reflecting back, Cancer and Leo. And then you would move on to the next sign, next sign, next sign. Yeah. And it goes on until, you die, and then beyond as well. And then beyond. But we've also seen really cool stuff. Like, I know Chris Brennan has talked about like Van Gogh's chart, because, like people who get famous, like posthumously, you can actually see stuff kind of like hit in their zodiacal releasing after they've already died, like when they get famous or when stuff sells. It's so wild. Yeah.
That's wild. That's so freaking cool.
Yeah, really, really cool. So there's just so much you can do with it, so much to dive into.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Speaking of what you can do with it, what is like, I feel like we all kind of know what you can do with it. You can see the peaks, the ebbs and flows. What are your favorite things to do with it?
I mean, I love to time like when someone's going to find their purpose. Like, I think this is one of the coolest things that you can do with it, is you can kind of look at the ruler of the lot of spirit and which sign that planet is in. And whenever you encounter that sign on an L2 level, essentially, because there's different levels, you'll encounter your purpose. And this has just been something that has hit in so many different. Yeah. Are you having a moment?
I'm having a moment.
What this means for you?
Yeah, I will bring it back later, but oh my God.
But that's why, because that moment that you just had right there, when you get to tell someone, like, that's when, and it's always the thing that they wanted to do their whole life, that they weren't sure if they should pursue, that, you know what I mean? And it's kind of like, you get to give them this moment where you get to really affirm them and be like, no, like, that's kind of what you're meant to be doing in this lifetime, or that's a big part of the work, the calling. And so that's one of my favorite things to do, as well as just kind of giving people an end date to like pain, and suffering. I think sometimes you're just in a really malefic period, and we all have them, right? Like, that's life. But when you're in them, and especially if you're not an astrologer and you have no concept of like the cycles and, like an end date, essentially, it can feel like it's never going to end. And I always think that's kind of like the worst part about depression, or like, it's just like, you think it's never going to get better. You're never going to get out of it. And so when you can kind of talk to someone and like explain, like, this is when it started. And then there's always that moment of recognition of like, oh shit, that and you get to like, and this is when it's going to end. And then at that point, it's almost like you can offer them a bit of hope, like something to look forward to, a time for like things to change and turn around. And it's not nothing, it's huge. It gives people something to like hold on to, a life raft. And it's accurate in so many cases that it's also like, I don't feel like I'm handing someone like a piece of, BS that like that date's going to roll around and nothing's going to change. And they're going to be like, it works. And so like,
it definitely does.
Yeah. It's been really, really cool. And those are like some of my favorite things to use it for.
Yeah.
So I guess I have a technical question. So with the birth times and zodiacal releasing, how important is it that they be exactly accurate? Because I know a lot of hospitals round times. And can you kind of figure out your birth time from zodiacal releasing, or?
Well, it's definitely, I don't offer rectification, like, professionally, but I've done it for a lot of people. And I definitely use zodiacal releasing just because you can time things really, really well. It doesn't matter where in the sign the lot falls. So that has like no, it's not going to change the timing at all. So that does kind of help you narrow things down. Like, if you're looking at the lot of fortune, it doesn't really matter if it's at like 1 or 29, you're still going to have the same timeline. And so that can kind of be really useful in terms of like, rectifying, or kind of even like rounded birth times. But that also comes with if it is like you're that one person, who's like on the cusp and it does change, then like that, it could be wrong, which is why probably zodiacal releasing doesn't work for some people, or like people don't have, as many hits with it necessarily. And I think that could always be, the case, just as like any time that you're looking at an inaccurate birth time, or potentially rounded one, or
Okay.
Gotcha.
Cool that it doesn't matter as much as I thought it did, though.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know.
It's
I had it in my head that it had to be perfectly exact or the zodiacal releasing would change. So that's cool.
no, not for the signs at least, which is really nice.
Okay.
But, for the lots themselves, of course, like they still, have aspects and things like that. So like they're, positioned relative to other planets and especially to the ruler of that lot and like the natural ruler of the lot, which we'll kind of get into a little bit, like spirit is the sun's lot. So like, can it see the sun and also its own ruler? Those are all going to be kind of important considerations when you're looking at lots. So for that, kind of whether they're going to be closer together and all of that is going to have the same weight and pull that it would otherwise like on other planets and stuff. So still important, just not for the timing purposes as important, which is nice.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Makes
is
it a little
nice.
bit more applicable for more people, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Cool. I have a question in my head, but I don't want to jump ahead too much. So let's go into like, we've already mentioned like the lot of spirit, lot of fortune. Can we go a little bit more in like what those signify?
Yeah, sure. So the lot of spirit and the lot of fortune are kind of like you said, the two key lots that mainly everybody starts with. And that's
Mhm.
because the lot of fortune is, the lot that's related to the moon. It's a lunar lot. And the lot of spirit is related to the sun. So it's a solar lot.
Okay.
And lots in general kind of speak to your fate or your allotment, right? Like the
Mhm.
whole name and basis of this comes from a lottery. And like back in, like ancient times, they would cast lots. And that was kind of like,
Yeah.
you got
Oh
your lot.
shit.
And that's where this whole thing comes from of like, you get your lots, and the lots are actually really important, obviously, because they determine a huge part of your fate. And
Yes.
so, the lots kind of speak to that nature, but the lot of fortune is going to kind of show you things that befall you or things that happen to you, things that come from like an external source. So it's
Mhm.
not like you instigating it. It's things that, happen to you. Like if you won the lottery, that would be like a lot of fortune thing, like very literally.
Mhm.
Right. But also if you like went and, broke your leg or something, like a lot of
Yeah.
fortune, right? Like lunar stuff,
Okay.
full body, things that befall you. Like if you got hit by a bus, not your
Oof.
fault, unless
Yeah.
maybe you didn't look or whatever, but you see what I mean. Like,
Yeah.
things that happen to you. And
Yeah.
a lot of spirit is more to do with like your soul. It's actually called the Lord of Soul. And
Ooh.
like it has kind of a lot to do with
Cool.
also, yeah, right. It's the only lot called the Lord of anything, which is, an
Oh,
interesting consideration as well. Um, but yeah, so it has a lot to do with also your mental health and like your mental state, which I think is really interesting when using zodiacal releasing to kind of
Yeah.
time that. And that's something that Valens, who's our like main source for this technique, talks about. He kind of says, it has a lot to say about that. And Paulus Alexandrinus was another one who kind of like wrote down the significations of the hermetic lots. And he says it's like the Lord of soul, temper, sense, and every capability. And it speaks to,
Ooh.
career and kind of like praxis, action, purpose, calling, like all of those things. Like I think of spirit as what is the work that you're meant to be doing in this lifetime?
Mm.
And how do you go
yeah.
about, actualizing that or acting on the things that befall you to, bring about certain events or, just like the actions you take is really spirit.
Very cool.
That feels very cool that they're based off of the sun and the moon then, because it feels like in the descriptions very yin versus yang, which is very true to the sun versus the moon archetype,
Mm.
right? So that's cool
Yeah.
that it goes through into that as
The
well.
active versus the things that
The
happen.
Mhm.
passive.
Ooh.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you also like you need both, right? Like they
Yes.
work
hmm
together and in harmony with one another. Like you need the sun and the moon, and you need this, you need spirit and fortune, you need soul and matter. And
Yeah.
so that's always really cool to think about with those two. But all of the planets or the traditional planets also have lots as well. So there's also like a lot afforded to each of the other traditional planets like Mars and Mercury and everybody. So everybody kind of has their own. And what I think is really interesting about lots is that like Robert Schmidt kind of describes them as like the planetary power is
Ooh.
like
Mm.
there in the lot. And so it actually like is the one that's kind of responsible for responding to certain situations that require the thing that the lot kind of has to do with. So like, for example, Mars is like the lot of courage. So it's like anytime that you're responding to something that is goes against like your inherent nature, that would be like a courage situation. So a lot of
Huh.
like courage would show you kind of moments where you're forced to act against your like inherent will
Ooh.
for cause or like for go against like your nature. And so there's
Mhm.
certain things like that where it's like it's
That's
still
cool.
stuff befalling
That's
you,
really
but
cool.
different like ways that you're responding to those events. And I always think that's really kind of an interesting way to conceptualize the lots.
That's
So
awesome.
sorry,
Yeah.
not to get too far to the left, but I have a question. So
Go.
whenever you have multiple lots in the same sign, are they going to be kind of inherently intertwined where you're going to have those events just flow together?
Yeah, so they're going to be intertwined. And so whenever you get
Mm.
activations to that house too, it's going to bring about all the significations of those lots, and especially the lot of fortune. If it's with another lot, then technically, like your fate tends to be kind of tied up in the other lot. So if it's like the lot of victory, then you might have, the circumstances that befall you might be better because they're Jupiter. Jupiter's
Mm.
influencing them through the lot of victory, versus if it's like, the lot of courage and it's Mars, then you might have more like martial things befall you, or
Hmm.
more like situations that cause you to have courage, right? Which are usually
Mhm.
not the most comfortable situations
Yeah.
if you have to respond with courage. And so you can see like the way that the different lots kind of influence each other. But it's definitely
That's
something that I
cool.
want to explore a lot more, because I haven't done like a ton of in like, session practice with this yet, but there's just so much to kind of like unearth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was curious about that too, because my
Mhm.
partner has the lot of spirit and Eros conjunct. Like they're like,
Yeah.
Dude, Lane has fortune and arrows together. Yeah,
Really?
that's why I asked, because I was like, oh,
wow.
okay.
Yeah, I think my husband also has his like fortune with some other things too. And so
That's
you can
so
see
cool.
like sometimes, yeah, like if people have spirit and eros like intertwined, like they'll oftentimes like work with the people that they're, in a romantic relationship with, or like that those two areas kind of can coincide, because their romantic timing and their professional timing will be the same. And so a lot of times, peaks in career are also peaks in relationships and things like that. So it's cool when you see stuff like that.
Yeah, that
I,
is
I
I
feel like I
have
could see that
examples.
from your notes.
I have examples. Oh
You're like,
yeah.
it's tracking.
Before we dive into that, I do have one other question. So I don't know if we've talked about like there's peak periods, follow through, and the build up.
Yeah.
Um, Before I ask my question, could we just touch on that real quick
Hmm.
after you finish drinking, please?
Yeah.
Don't
Sorry. My
choke.
mouth is like so dry these days, when the like summer ends and the, just Saturn
Yes.
takes over and you just can feel your whole body like
Yes.
drying from the inside
Yes.
out.
Every day I've just been like, why do I feel like this? And Austin will be like, did you drink water? I'm like,
Yeah.
no.
I know. I don't know where, like, I just completely have forgotten, water is important, but,
Yeah.
anyway.
I feel
Yeah,
like I
so
have to
peaks
drink
and
too.
all of that. So yes, basically there is kind of like a cycle that happens, and everybody is going to have a slightly different one. So you're going to want to look at like where your lot of fortune is placed and what modality that sign is in. So if it's cardinal, if it's fixed, or if it's mutable, and those are going to kind of represent your peak periods. And
Okay.
so just to establish, like, peak does not mean good. Peak peak can just mean active, and sometimes you can have a lot going on and it doesn't feel really good, right? So that's just like a good distinction to remember, that it's not always positive.
Yeah.
It can certainly be, but that's going to be different for everybody depending on, like, if you have, if you're a day chart and you have Mars in a cardinal sign and your, a lot of fortune is in a cardinal sign, then your peak periods actually might be some of your most difficult times, and it could feel really stressful when you have a lot going on. And those
Mhm.
like situations that come about can be more martial in nature, like you have peak periods and they, relate to conflict, or like, kind of moments where you're really busy and active and doing things in a way that doesn't feel necessarily like easy and flowing, but more
Mhm.
stressful and, exhausting. And so that's kind of like the nature of a peak period, versus if you have a benefic activated, then it's going to kind of color the flavor with that more sweet, abundant, happy kind of vibe.
Yeah.
But everyone's going to kind of have that period where you have a prep period, you have a peak period, and then you have a follow through period. And I kind of describe it as like, climbing up a hill and then reaching the summit and climbing back down. So when
Mhm.
you're in the prep period, you're laying the groundwork, you're kind of, focused on building something, you're working
Mhm.
towards something. You're not always sure what you're working towards because you haven't necessarily had that like aha moment. Sometimes you are, sometimes you're not, just depends on the person and the way their chart's set up.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
but it's kind of like, when you're climbing a mountain, you're just putting one foot in front of the other. You don't really have any payoff if you're just staring up at the big hill in front of you that you have to climb, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what those prep periods feel like. It's like you're kind of in this moment where you're putting a lot of work in and you haven't necessarily seen a lot of payoff, or you haven't like launched the product, or, if that's like kind of the metaphor you want to use. This is like the design, the creation. This is when you're talking to like branding and distributors and all this stuff, but like no one even knows you're making a product, right? There's been no validation. There's been no one kind of coming in and being like, this is a great thing. And then, you hit the peak period and you launch. And you release and you kind of put out the product. And that's usually the moment that's most active, right? Like you're dealing with orders, you've got customer service stuff now, you're making tweaks, like all of those. That's kind of like the peak period. You're at the top of the mountain and there's still stuff to do at the top, right?
Yeah.
But you're kind of at a period where now you can see the payoff, right? You get the view at least. So it kind of feels usually, at least for a lot of people, like, oh, like at least I can kind of feel now that I'm like making progress. Like they're usually it's very active times. You usually feel like you kind of have a bit of cosmic momentum pushing you forward. And then you have the follow through period where you kind of come back down the other side of the mountain. You've released the product, right? And now you're kind of selling it. You're just kind of like, there doesn't mean there's not still things to do. And like, you've still got like orders to field, but it's not as busy as when you launched because it's kind of like coming down the mountain. And so for some people, that's a really enjoyable part of the process. For some people who have malefics activated during that time, it can kind of be like the come down after the high, of like the launch. And then you come back and you're like, oh, now like I don't have all the validation. Like I'm not going to get any sales. Like this sucks. Like, and so that kind of cycle is different for everybody, depending on where their benefic and malefic planets fall, and in which, modality or, and so, yeah, that's kind of the way that those periods were.
That was perfect. Thank you so much. Oh my God. I love living for the examples. My brain needs these.
I feel like I just always have to give an example. It's like an Aquarius Mercury thing. I'm like, I will make this practical. Like, I will find a way to make this like explainable.
Perfect. And you mentioned something that I think answered my original question, but so when we look at peak periods, we're no matter what lot we're looking at, we're going to use the modality of the sign that the lot of fortune is in to determine that?
Yes, you'll always use the signs angular to fortune.
Okay.
For every lot. So it doesn't matter, like even if your lot of spirit is in a different modality, you're still going to look at the ones for lot of fortune in terms of those being the peak periods, just because that's like the physical incarnation point of like matter and spirit. And there's kind of something there about the physical manifestation of fate. That kind of comes from that. And then, there's fortune houses, like a whole different set of house significations derived from the lot of fortune. So we actually like, you also you use fortune houses too. And so there's other things that kind of get tied in with that. And so the lot of fortune is kind of thought to be one of the most important parts of the chart, like just as important as the ascendant, just as important as the MC. They really thought it was like, the ancient astrologers, like they would perfect. They would do everything from the lot of fortune, like first and foremost.
Whoa,
really?
Yeah.
I have my lot of fortune conjunct my north node, and one astrologer that I was doing a reading with, she had told me that it was kind of like that fate kind of steers my life where it should be, where it's easy for me to just take my hands off and let life kind of do it because the timeline is going to be there for me.
That's more cool. So than I like that people. As a delineation.
Yeah.
That is
neat. I love that.
That's very neat. Sick. Okay. So that is a fantastic foundation for zodiacal releasing. If you guys want to learn more, I'm going to plug it right now. I watched Kira's lecture on this the other day, and it was so in-depth and helpful. I'm going to watch it many more times because I'm sitting there like, I should have been taking notes this whole time. I just wanted to absorb it. And then I'm like, oh man, mistake. But that's okay. I just get to watch it again. But that is a fantastic place to start if Chris Brennan's 4 to 18 hours sounds a bit much. Kira's is very palatable and accessible. So highly recommend.
Thank you.
I also feel like I've watched both of them, and I feel like Kira gave different examples than Chris Brennan. So it wasn't like you guys were just saying the same stuff. I feel like yours is really good on its own, and it has a lot of relevant stuff that you put out there.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And we have like a slightly different way of doing it too. Like I've kind of veered off of his method entirely. Like I still use a lot of the stuff that he taught me, but Robert Schmidt does zodiacal releasing in a very different way than Chris Brennan. And so after taking his kind of course on it and, working with it for a while, I'm still trying to find how to blend the two, but I feel like there's a lot there that Chris doesn't necessarily cover for, you know, a variety of reasons, I suppose. And, but I think it's really like crucial and important information that like when you're learning, I think it kind of, for me at least, without having that information, made it a lot more difficult to learn, you know, and I think that
Yeah.
having that kind of knowledge would have helped me a lot when I was learning. So that was kind of like also what I was trying to do, is bring the different methods together and kind of present like a way that maybe hopefully a bit more holistic and a bit less cut and dry, and like allows for a bit more nuance to kind of come into the picture. And yeah, hopefully I like accomplished that. But I think
Yeah.
Definitely.
I think you
I
did.
was never lost. I was just,
cool.
yeah, I wasn't lost. I was just wishing I had my notebook because I'm like, I need to remember this.
It was a lot, you know. I didn't realize how much goes into it until you like sit down to be like, okay, I need to backtrack like to the very first step. And then I was like, wait, there's so much you have to do, even just down
There's so
to
much you have to
that.
cover.
You know what I mean? Just to be able to
Yes.
give you the distinction between benefic and malefic. And yeah, there's so much background info you have to be able to do the technique. But then once you're working with it, I feel like it really comes alive and it can show you so much. And it's really, really cool. So it's worth it, you know. It's just you gotta have the
Absolutely.
dedication.
Yeah, no, and your lecture I think was actually part of like what helped us determine that she was a day chart, because we're like,
Cool.
yeah, because we're like,
Yeah.
wait, let's look at your periods, like which ones were more painful. And she's like,
Yeah.
ah.
It's like, there it is.
It's like one of the best ways to, I feel like, rectify charts, because you can just so easy, it's so obvious in CR, you know, like which periods are bad, depending on if, you know, if you're not one of those people that has both like malefics activated at the same time, in which case like then it gets pretty difficult to determine. But when you don't, it's almost clear as day. Sometimes you're like, yeah, that was definitely the worst year of my life. Like, no contest. Or the best, you know.
Well, even with all the mitigation that I have in my chart, it was still glaringly like, oh yeah, this period of time really sucked. So
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Helps you plan for the future though, you know, when you see a bad moment
Yes.
coming, you can kind of prepare and, you know, at least not go into it totally blind, which can be helpful in my experience.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which goes back to what we've talked about in previous episodes, how there can be so much solace that you get from astrology, and kind of what you were talking about earlier, Kira, how it can really give people some peace of mind knowing that, okay, well, here's where there's going to be some bad shit, so maybe we should prep ourselves and fortify ourselves for it.
Yeah. And just like validation in their experiences. You know, I think so many of us kind of diminish our pain and we're like, no, like it wasn't that bad. But sometimes the astrology is like, it was that bad.
It was pretty bad.
And sometimes like you literally need someone to say that to you. And like it's kind of the universe's way of like affirming your pain and being like, no, like that was real. That was tough. You went through some shit and like you made it out alive and you're on the other side of it, you know? And I think that there's something, at least to me, that feels very comforting about that knowledge and that fact, you know.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Definitely. All right, well, we have a fantastic basis for zodiacal releasing, if I can only say it. Let's hop into the Lot of Eros. So we've kind of talked about how you draw the significations for fortune and spirit, and you mentioned courage as well, being tied to Mars. So how is the Lot of Eros used? Where does that come from?
Yeah, so this was actually like a Chris Brennan thing, kind of. He was the one who was first like, we're gonna try to release from Eros. I think
Wow. I didn't know that.
So this is kind of like his contribution. They were at like Project Hindsight, which was like, you know, this concave of astrologers who were basically like translating all of these ancient astrological texts for the first time. And so like we were going through like this huge traditional revival, and they were kind of applying all of these different techniques. It was the first time they'd uncovered zodiacal releasing. It was like in 95, I think. And I know.
That's so wild to think about.
Same. And like, it makes sense. The math is mathing.
95 baby is still different.
I was like, the moi.
Me? Oh my God.
So yeah, like in 95, they were going through all these texts, they find zodiacal releasing, and they started applying it to all these charts. Like they really went into like the entire life of, you know, Einstein and Hitler and like all of these key people, because they wanted to see if it worked on like this long-term basis. And then I think Chris at some point had the idea to like, well, what about like a lot of Eros for love and relationships and kind of that stuff. And so he started working on that. And I think he was the one that kind of popularized using the Lot of Eros, and specifically releasing from Eros to kind of time events in a romantic situation. And so I have thoughts.
I thought.
Tell me your
on
thoughts.
And so, there's kind of a lot there, but like basically I think what we should kind of do first is define what the Lot of Eros is, like just from a
Yes.
standard traditional text to kind of give us some basis for like what we're working with here. So we all
Yes.
are all pulling on the same sources, right?
Mhm.
So the definition in Paulus Alexandrinus, which is like the most complete definition that I think we have, is it says Eros signifies appetites and desires occurring by choice, and it becomes responsible for friendship and favor.
Mm.
That's it. There's nothing about love in there, right? Like not a word. Now, doesn't mean a lot of Eros doesn't show up, in things related to love. But first and foremost, it's your desires. It's what you want, what you crave, like what your appetites are. You could want anything. You could want power. You could desire, like domination, or like it's not always these like really kind of cushy significations that we give it. And I think, in my opinion, I've come across a lot of people who think that like releasing from the Lot of Eros just doesn't work. And I'll say like it's very hit or miss. And I think it's because people only use it to look at love, and it's not that, it's desires. Are you having are you achieving your desires? Are you having an easier time with that? Are you running into obstacles, right? And this can overlap with romantic relationships for sure, but it is not the basis of what Eros is. And so I think there's so much about it that's much more about like pleasure and friendship too. Like friendship really shows up in Eros. So I've had a lot of people kind of have their peaks just be like when they meet their best friend or stuff like that. Like it doesn't always have to be romantic. And so I think we've kind of lost some of that, like what Eros is really about, just because we're so quick to just say like fortune is body and spirit is career and Eros is love. And it's like, no, like, yes, but also it's so much more, and if we kind of, we lose a lot when we just look at it that way. And we also get a lot less accurate because we're not accounting for the fact that like your friendship could show up there, like good sex could show up there, like, you know what I mean? Like, whatever it is that you currently desire, and like your Eros is going to kind of speak to those desires. And so you also kind of have to unearth your own natal Eros placement to figure out, what do you even want? Like, what are you craving? What are your passions and pleasures and all of that, and then when are you kind of having an easier time with that? And when are you having a more challenging time? When are you having peaks? And that can kind of speak to when you're like actualizing your desires. Some people, that's just work stuff, right? Like some people it can just be like being successful in your career, or, like different stuff like that.
I'm having another moment.
I'm having
another moment
too.
No, because this is so, I mean, I had the inkling that was kind of where this was going. And especially when you likened, you said courage was related to Mars. Is Eros related to Venus?
Yeah, and spirit. So like the calculation is spirit to Venus. And so it does bring Venus in, but also it brings in spirit. And so it's a spirit lot. The benefic lots, Victory and Eros, are both from spirit, versus like the fortune lots, which are Mars and Mercury. And Mercury's is actually like pretty nasty significations. It doesn't sound like Mercury at all if you read what the Lot of Necessity is all about. It's like imprisonments and subordinations and battles and wars. It sounds like a lot more martial than you think.
Very martial.
Yeah. And it kind of comes from that idea of like contests being associated with Mercury, like all types of contests, and those aren't always positive. And so, the fortune lots are necessity and courage. And then the spirit lots are Eros and victory. So you kind of have like an interesting distinction between benefic and malefic. And kind of, the more benefic things coming from the actions that you take almost, and like the more malefic things coming from things that you don't always have the capacity to control. Or things fall you, So it's kind of something to dig into there too.
There is a lot to dig into there. Whoa.
The lots have been like just blowing my mind. I'm just so excited to sit down and talk about that.
Dude, yeah. Like that is going to sit with me for a while. The benefic ones come from things that you act on, whereas the other ones are just what fucking happens.
Stuff that befalls you. Yeah, it's really interesting to think about those different things. And so I feel like a lot of Eros is it's just not always what we make it out to be, but it doesn't mean that there isn't overlap. Like, and we'll get into, like we're going to talk about a lot of Eros, like significations and stories and stuff. And there's definitely ways it shows up for romantic things if that's what you're desiring at the time. But it's just not only that. And that's kind of the thing that I keep harping about. I feel very strongly about this.
And you know what? out of curiosity, like looked at my Lot of Eros for one of the things that I've done recently that has been something that I just wanted to do. I never let myself do it before, but I really wanted it. I started playing
Mhm.
Dungeons and Dragons.
Cool.
And I looked at when I started that first campaign,
Yeah.
my Lot of Eros was activated on L1 and L2. And
Yeah.
I was in a peak period on level 3 on my 10th house because my
Yeah.
Lot of Fortune is angular. So every time it's activated, it's also activating an angle.
Mhm.
And then it was a loosing of the bonds on fourth level, also peak
That's
period.
cool.
There you go. What was it? What was the sign that it was of the loosing of the bond?
Leo, fourth house, where
Leo.
my fortune is.
What's funny about that too is that Valens actually gives you like distinctions for the different loosing of the bonds. And so going from Saturn to the sun, he'd be like handing over from Saturn to the sun. So like yeah, it is associated with visibility and actually like you are physically loosening like a bond or a restriction that's around you, but it's something that allows you to profit and to gain,
Wow.
like they say eminence, but you know, on like a lower level, that's just like almost agency and like having being able to say like I want to go do this thing and I'm just gonna like let myself be visible, very 10th house too, kind of, right? Like I'm going
Yeah.
to get over like whatever, you know, associations people are going to give to my image, my public image, my reputation. I'm just going to go do the thing I want to do.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
very like, you know, Eros, like all of those different significations kind of coming together. But it's
Yeah.
not about a romantic relationship. It's just about something you wanted to do.
Yep.
And so
Hmm.
I think that's really cool that we can see stuff like that kind of show up there and give it a little bit
Mhm.
more nuance.
Yeah, and it's neat too because
Yeah.
now I have all of the Eros significations living in my head, like from our relationship, because I was just curious. And it is activating very different things. Like this, the Dungeons and Dragons example activated my like fourth, 10th, seventh, like all of those angles, like things. And I have like very strong relationships with all of those people now, and it's still a part
Yeah.
of my life. And we're starting a second campaign now, so it's like it's very ingrained. Whereas
Yeah.
the activations for my relationship are very much more like fifth house and
Hmm.
other parts of the chart. So that's really cool. That has that much nuance to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just like in my personal timing, my relationship shows up 10 times more from spirit than it does from Eros.
It
I
does
was
with
gonna
mine
say that
too.
too, because
Yeah.
I was looking and releasing from all of them just to kind of get a baseline of what it was and like where Lane shows up in my zodiacal releasing, and he's on everything. It's because he's such a
Mhm.
big part of my life. But
Hmm.
yeah, it was interesting because in the Lot of Spirit, the dates were just perfect with a lot of things.
Yeah. And that was something that like I noticed pretty quickly, like just in my own timing and timing of clients. It's like it doesn't seem like the arrow stuff always like and sometimes there is
Hmm.
like you do get hits, but it's not consistent like it is with spirit. And
Hmm.
then if we just get back to like the standard baseline, you know, calculation of a lot of arrows, it comes from spirit, right? It's just like the
Hmm.
Venus part of it. So it's
The
like,
Venus part.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, you know, it's showing those desires, those pleasures, and all of those things, but it's also speaking to all the other stuff, right? And versus like
Hmm.
spirit is, it's everything you do. It's like, it's
Hmm.
your
Yeah.
general life direction. How could your relationships not show up there? And one of the things that I've always said too is like spirit is almost like what you strive for. Adina Rising on Twitter once said
Ooh.
that to me, and I thought it was so good. And I was thinking
Hmm.
in the context of relationships and how relationships have changed over time, you know, just our like the nature of relationships. They didn't used to be something that you strived for very much, right? Like it was like
Mm.
something that was organized or arranged. You had a very like systematic procedure. It wasn't something that you like wanted and craved. And maybe you did, but you didn't often get, you know, the person or the, you know, the
Hmm.
situation that you really wanted and craved. And so it was much more of like almost a fortune thing. And
Hmm.
Yeah.
now we've almost moved into this place where like to make a relationship work in like modern times, like I think anyone would agree you have to strive for that.
Hmm.
Like you have to put in effort. You have to choose, right? You have to make the
Yeah.
choice every day with your like free
Yeah.
will to like show up for the relationship, to be there, to make, you know, your partner is going to move across the country. What are you doing? Are you going with? Like, are you
Hmm.
staying? You know, like all of those big, huge life choices, of course, they're going to show up in spirit. It's going to affect your entire life. You know, it's like, I think it's in my opinion, you know, I think relationships tend to really show up in spirit and it tends to be more consistent than I have seen with a lot of arrows.
Mm.
That's the tea from
I
my
think
end.
it's, oh, sorry.
I'll
I
drink
think
that
it's
tea.
interesting that we keep kind of using these words about choice and desire. They're very active and very kind of like you are putting that intention out there for you to do something. And it kind
Mm,
of goes back to that existential question for me about zodiacal releasing, where you kind of get into this hole of like, oh shit, what is fate? Like, do we have any control? And it's kind of cool that that almost like what we think of as free will still shows up in zodiacal releasing in a specific
mm.
way for the lots. And it just feels like another level of like, okay, we're all in a simulation. It's fine.
Yeah, it's like when even your free will is trackable. It's
Yeah.
like, is it really free will if it's trackable? You
Yeah.
know, like if I can trace it down to the second of the decision, you know, like when those L8 periods came out, I was like, let me just see what I'm doing on like a minute level, like one day, you know? Like my peak period on like an L7 was like the moment that I got up to go make the smoothie. You know what I mean? It's like you getting out of bed. Like those are like the minute things that show up on
Bruh.
those. So it's like it literally is just like any action you take, which like on a
Mm,
level is like getting out of your bed to go get yourself some food, right? And maybe
Yeah.
from Eros, you're really craving a food. So there, like, and that's where you can see all these kind of interlabs and things kind of intertwine. But yeah, it kind of gets you into a very interesting place depending on your relationship to fate and free will. And you know, not everyone has the same kind of relationship to it as I know I do. So
we're definitely gonna have a
Yeah.
whole episode on that one because
I'm like, please bring me.
Okay, well, I
yes.
feel like we could do a podcast about it, and that would just be real fun.
I would die to come
Oh,
and just talk about fate and free will with you guys.
Yes,
100%. It is written.
I'm
Beautiful,
here
beautiful.
for it.
Oh my God.
My Mercury aspecting Jupiter is like, please.
I'm begging. I'm begging.
Same.
Oh my God. Sick. Okay, so that's very, and it gets me thinking about, I've actually said this to Anna, how um our relationship, I see it so clearly in both Spirit and Eros.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Definitely, definitely Spirit, especially since he has Spirit and Eros like together. I actually
Yeah.
just went and like clicked between them. I'm like, oh, what am I doing? It's the same thing. It's the exact
Yeah.
same thing. But yeah, I definitely see that for me as well. It shows up a lot in
Mhm.
Spirit because
Yeah.
I guess for context, for those who don't know, my partner and I met through our music, and that is still our goal. Like we've always been, even before we were romantic partners, we were like work partners, and we like just had that bond. We wanted the same thing at the same level. And it's definitely fed into our relationship. So it's definitely always, even our composite chart, like we have so much sixth house. It's a very sixth house composite chart because we're just here to work on shit together. That's
Dude,
what
So
we're doing.
cute.
I hadn't even thought about that, but like that makes sense with the composite chart house activations. Those are also coming in for the zodiacal releasing house activations. Okay, mind
Hmm.
blown.
Yep. Yep. Isn't that funny? Yeah.
Oh,
So
everything's
cool.
So
connected.
many layers.
Okay, so then going off of that, I guess my next question is like, what are some examples of like some of your favorite examples of ways that you've used either Eros or Spirit to like predict like or time relationship things?
Yeah, so I definitely have successfully used, you know, Eros and Spirit to time. Like I've timed two friends' engagements to the week. Like one of them
That's
was
awesome.
within days. Like it was really
That's
cool.
wild.
Yeah, and they were friends who were clients too. You know, like they're, you know, the good, nice kind of friends. So like, hey.
Yeah.
And whatnot. And so yeah, it was funny too because they both ended up getting married like with or you know engaged within like 2 months of each other. So both of them had had this on their minds. They both been with their partners for a long time. They were like, "Can you look like you know?" And and I was
That's
like,
so
"Can you
funny.
see anything? Like I think it might be coming." Which also I will say like helps a lot. Like you have to know as well like where someone is, and that
Yeah.
information is only going to come through conversation with another person or through your own knowledge of your lived experience. Like
Yeah.
it does not matter. I could look at someone's timing. I'm not going to know if they're married yet. I like, I won't, you know what I mean? And that's just like I could say, oh, you had a peak at this time around this age, but like everyone's timing is so different that I don't even feel like you can go off of that. Like, you know, like
Yeah.
some people get married at 60 for the first time, and some people get married at 19 for the first time. And those peak periods can show up like very differently for different people. So what I like to do is I kind of try to stack them, you know, like I look at Eros and I look at Spirit, and I see like when are we having activations on both, and kind of like when can we kind of do, like really like, you know, hone in on the peak periods for both. And when we have overlap, that's when I tend to say like this is the most likely time you would be to have like, you know, something happen. And so that was really cool that I was so shocked. Like, even it doesn't matter how many times you've gotten like a prediction right, like it never isn't the coolest thing in the world. You're like, I just predicted the future accurately. Like it's like a high, like an
It
astrologer
is.
high, you
That's
know, every
awesome.
time.
It's real life divination. And like, I know we all use that word and we all are like, yeah, we're divine, but it's like,
Like,
we are
No, it is.
divining.
Yes, we are divining. It
It's
is, you know,
wild.
it is a oracular moment. Yeah, literally, like it's so
Yes.
cool. So that was really cool. And so yeah, like different things like with that. But I've also seen a lot of arrows show up with a pregnancy and stuff like
Something
that.
that's desired. Yeah, that makes a
Right?
lot
Yeah,
of
for a lot of
sense.
people. Yeah. And so I actually like timed, I think I got it. This is one of my most annoying moments, is that I didn't like publicly at the time like make this declaration. I
Oh,
got Kylie Jenner's child's birthday right, the second one. I was like, and like sick, like before she ever announced she was pregnant. Like before it was
Yo,
confirmed.
dude.
I know. And like I was so bummed that I didn't, like I hadn't tweeted about it or anything. Like I had a doc, like, but it was so, yeah, I just wish that like I would have
yo,
Dude.
that
like,
is mind blowing. That's so
yeah,
cool.
like the kid is definitely going to be born right after Stormy. I was like, because I know that birthday, I was like obviously looking at her activations for when she had Stormy, and then I was looking at her activations for like coming up, and I was like, well, it was a very similar one, and I was like, that's weird. It's like a day or two after. I was like, maybe it's just her
Wow.
birthday. And it was like, no, because like there's also stuff on the Lot of Fortune, which of course, if you're going to be birthing a child, you always want to look at a lot of fortunes,
Yeah,
right?
it's happening.
Happening to the physical body, you know, just a casual, you know, everyday run of the mill occurrence. And
God,
so
I
oftentimes, yeah, like overlap between Fortune and Eros, big like pregnancy stuff coming up, or,
wow.
you know, yeah, childbirth and stuff. So that's been cool too, in terms of like using it for that.
I feel like I'd be afraid to look at that. I'm like, ah. But I also have a lot of significations coming up where it looks like I'm gonna have one soon. And so I probably should look.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like there's always like almost always like an L4 loosing of the bond, you know, like right around the time
Mm,
of birth of the child, which just makes so much sense. You know, like either way, you're like, you know, kind of entering into a different, like a different point, a completely different place than you were the day before. And so it's like usually heavily signified by like L4 loosing of the bonds. But yeah, there's a lot that you can kind of look for with that for sure.
That's
that's
cool.
awesome.
Yeah.
Let me see.
Okay, where do we go from here?
From
I
here,
know.
so before we do have examples that we're happy to share and kind of geek over with everybody, because
Yeah.
it's one of our favorite things to do here. So our entire family synastry episode was we're just like,
True.
look at this. I guess before we do that though, any like check your bias, any warnings, any, I think we've kind of covered this a
Yeah.
bit, but any specific like bewares when using zodiacal releasing like this?
Yeah, like a lot, you know, like probably
A lot.
a lot. Like too
Yes.
many to like dish out. You know, like if you're gonna use this like responsibly and ethically, like there's a lot of considerations that you have to
Yeah.
have in terms of like working with CR and against your own bias. Like if you're someone who freaks out really easily about like seeing you know, everyone has a malefic period. And if you're not comfortable with knowing that you're going to have like a 20-year malefic period or maybe a 30-year malefic period, like probably not the person to be like using this technique, you know, and just like knowing that before you kind of dive in, because I didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing.
Oh.
And now there's no going back, which is great. I have adopted a stoic philosophy of like, you know, I love my fate. It is my fate. But
Yeah.
it takes a lot to get there. And I think like I'm not certain that everyone is meant to like go down that journey of like kind of reckoning with fate and like
Yeah.
free will and what that means
Yeah.
on such an intense level. And, you know, I think for some people it can cause spirals, you know, like they don't want to know the future. They want like an element of surprise, and which there always is anyway. But like I think, just knowing who you are before you kind of like just dive in with this, because it's big. It's not, I don't know how to like contextualize it in a way that even gives it like the, weight that it needs to have. But it's like you
Yeah.
can look at it like an entire person's life before they're ever born and identify every positive day that they're going to have, every challenging experience, big peak. Like there's something to that like, should we even do this? I don't know. But like we're doing it. We're there. But like, it's very powerful, and like
Yeah.
I think it's just something to be, cognizant of as you're working with it. And also just knowing that like everyone's bad days look different. Like a malefic activation for one person is not going to be the same as another person. It's all going to rely back on like the chart, and kind of how you approach conflict, approach challenging situations too, like all of those different things. And so yeah, just like tread carefully, I would say, like, but just tread responsibly. Like, I obviously saw this and was like, dive off the deep end, like, of course, and then like had a 6-month period where I only thought about fate and free will, like every minute of my life. And so I don't know for that moment, And so I just say, like be a little careful when you're starting out, but like just check your bias always. I think with astrology, like you never know, and like you could have a period that looks really challenging, but those challenges produce like great things. And there's always all of those little like add-ons.
Exactly. Yeah.
Malefics are always malefic, and like that kind of stuff.
It also sounds like there's just a level of responsibility that comes with using Zodiacal releasing. Like you should use it responsibly and don't scare people because you see, if you see someone else's Zodiacal releasing and you see a really horrible time coming up, maybe like think about, were they someone that can handle hearing that,
Yeah. Yeah, like if 100%, like especially in a client like context, like not everyone, if anyone at all, needs to know that they're about to start a 30-year like shitty period.
Yeah.
Like no one needs to hear that information. Like who is that benefiting? You know what I mean? Like maybe us as astrologers have I think a level of like distance between these things. Like oftentimes, where it's kind of like time becomes this thing that we really interact with in like this intimate way. And it seems like 30 years, we're like, yeah, it's a Saturn cycle, but like whatever. That's my whole fucking life. Like, are you joking?
Yeah.
It's not like something to just be, cavalier about, which is why I tend to like focus, at least like in all my astrology, I do try to focus on like the bright spots and like the positive times. And, maybe you're in a really malefic chapter, but you have like a really, benefic L2 coming up. Like, we're going to talk about it. You know what I mean? Like, we're going to find the bright spot. And so I think there's also like, knowing that you could be in like the worst chapter of a book that you're reading, and you could get to a page where you forget like that the chapter sucks, right? Because like the page is so good. And that's just the way we experience life as well. You could have like a really like challenging, 15 years, but like 8 of those years were really good because you were in benefic L2s. And that doesn't mean you're screwed for 15 years or like whatever it is, it just means you're in the rough part, and we all have a rough part. And so you also just have to accept like the ebbs and the flows, I think is like the huge thing.
That's beautiful.
It was definitely very helpful to me looking at my spirit and realizing I had been in a malefic period for like 12 years, 15 years. And then, but I didn't find that out until after, like right when it was switching. And I was like, oh, wow. Oh, sick.
And like, what a relief. Like, I love to give that news to someone. I'm like, oh, baby girl, like we are 50 years are going to stop. Like the last 20, I know. And you can literally tell people like the worst is over. Like for like, once they get out of like their most challenging period, like it really should never be that hard again in terms of like mental health, or in terms of, and that's how we can kind of differentiate too. Like maybe it will get harder physically at some point, like all of our bodies deteriorate, but like mentally you're good at this point, or the flesh bag. Just Aquarius. But yeah, so there's just a lot of different kind of distinctions you can get into with that.
Yeah. I feel like we've mentioned a lot, like what your worst period would be, and how would you, I know that there's a lot of nuance to that.
Yeah.
What that's, because you're tying in sect, you're tying in the malefic contrary to sect, you're tying in your own chart and the placement where that planet is. Is there Is there a simple way to kind of look at that and know like these ones are going to be more challenging for you? Or is it really nuanced to the point where it's like, ask an astrologer?
Yeah, I mean, I think like yes, like if you want the simple answer, just look for your malefic contrary to sect.
Okay.
Look at the sign that's in. Whenever you have those periods, probably going to be worse.
Okay.
Whenever you have periods in that modality, probably going to be more challenging. The worst ones are the one where it's in the sign itself and the sign that is overcome by the malefic,
Okay.
as well. So like those two should be the worst. And then like if you want to, then like the opposition would be a little less challenging, and then like the minor one would be like a little less challenging, but kind of like, so there's grades of it. But yeah, just looking at the sign that contains your malefic contrary to sect and knowing those are probably your most challenging periods, and then like contrary as well, with like your benefic up sect being your most positive periods.
Exactly. So then there's
Can
Yeah.
attest that worked for me.
It
that was
works
how I kind of like
shockingly well.
yeah. I was like, okay, Aquarius periods suck, and that is fine.
Yeah. And it always sucks when it's the Aquarius ones too, because they're the longest,
No.
so you get like
I know. And all of my stuff is in Aquarius, so it's just like, okay, well, everything's activated and everything sucks and it's fine.
maybe it's just Saturn things that gets better with time, right? Especially if you're a date chart, hopefully.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Yeah, I was born into a Pisces lot of spirit period, which is where my Saturn is, which is the malefic contrary to sect. And then after that, it went into an Aries period, which is my 12th house, ruled by Mars in the 5th, opposing that malefic. So it's still that was rough. And then literally February of this year moved into a Taurus period. I'm like,
yeah.
I'm imagining the Tangled, and now I see the light, and Hannah's just releasing the lanterns.
That's exactly what I was hearing in my head.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's like a really interesting way too to see like how someone experiences their childhood, and even for children, you would also kind of want to look more at fortune than spirit, because
that's true.
And like you don't really have a lot of agency when you're a kid. You're kind of just going wherever your parents, drag you around to. And so in that context, you're operating from a much more like fortune-based perspective. But then we could also like spirit stuff still shows up, which is really cool. Like you could see if you were like a kid and you were like, in a spelling bee, like that would show up from spirit, like a spirit peak, it's like cute stuff like that, where it's still applicable. It's just
that's so
kind of related to the level of agency you have at a given moment.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I don't know. My mind's just blown how cool everything overlays.
Yeah, I feel like ZRs is one of those things where there's so many layers, there's so many things to it, and every time you learn something new, it just clicks more into place and it becomes like cooler and cooler.
Yes,
more
absolutely.
Specific.
Yeah. Okay. I'm now looking at fortune. I'm like, no, 4th house, peak Leo period, born into until 2014, which was a long time, but and that moved into Virgo with Mars opposing Saturn, and that's where we are. But it's changing in 2033, and that's when Austin's L1 period also changes. So I'm like,
that's cute.
See you in 10 years. But see, for me, like you already said, like for me, I'm like 10 years, great, sick. Yeah, I'm 37. That'll be rocking. I'm here for it. I can build up till then. Fine.
I just entered a whole new L1 from Spirit like a week ago, and I'm just like, I don't know who I am anymore. Like this is real. Like I was at a Gemini peak period for the last 20 years. Like I'm not 27-year Cancer period.
Hell yeah. I mean, I'm biased. I'm like here for that, but
I mean, if my moon wasn't like most debilitated planet in my entire chart, I would maybe be a little more excited.
Okay, that's fair.
I'm sure it's gonna be great. It's gonna be super fun and fresh, I'm sure.
Yes, we're gonna say yes.
Yes, we're going yes. We're always being positive,
Oh my
Well,
God.
I think all negatives can be a positive if you let them, like if you think about it in that way. That doesn't mean the experience is going to be positive or good, but you can always conceptualize it retrospectively as like, okay, this was ass, but what did I learn? You
Yeah.
know?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like
Yeah.
there's usually at least like something you can take from a situation. And then you get into like fate and like if everything's fated, well,
Yeah.
then
Then whatever.
But we'll just let
Exactly.
that one, hang off.
We'll wait until we do the episode about fate and free will.
Oh yeah.
So
We
good.
will we will take our time. Okay,
Time.
cool. So any last thoughts on it before we get into some examples?
Unless you guys
Anybody?
have questions, I'm good.
I feel like we've asked a lot of the questions I had, at least.
Same.
Cool.
Perfect. Cool. All right. Well, then Anna and I have like the like the individuals that we are, we have made timelines of our relationships in relation to Eros, but I'm also gonna pull up my spirit
Yeah,
on
pull
the
up
side
spirit too.
because for Austin, his Eros is his spirit, so it's like
Mhm.
that works there already, but I'm gonna just double drag my thing next to it so I can actually see. For anybody who wants to look at your zodiacal releasing, I recommend going to astro.com, putting all your information in. And when you're in the chart selection, chart type is natal chart wheel. Make sure you have your name in there. Chart drawing style, put in Hellenistic. You can make your house system whatever you want, but the Hellenistic chart drawing style will give you your lots. So yeah, that is my
You can use
recommendation.
AstroSeek as well, which is a little easier, I think, to work with just because you can see like the lower levels a bit easier. Like I'm not sure if Astro gives you like Astro.com if it gives you the L5s and
It does
later.
not. It
Everybody
does
wants
not.
as well that level of precision. Not everybody
Have
wants to
you?
know by the hour when they're peaking, but like I do,
I
for what
do.
I do.
I have not dipped my toe in yet because I'm like, I'm gonna get in too deep.
very,
I
very fair.
I also really liked zodiacalreleasing.net to look at
Yeah.
mine. It was a little bit easier for me.
It highlights the peak periods, which is
Yeah.
really nice.
Mhm.
Have you used that, Kira? Is it accurate?
I haven't used it, but I have friends who use it. And I feel like every time they send me a screenshot, I'm like, oh, that looks so nice. Like that's a really nice way to look at it,
Yeah.
Especially because
Yeah.
AstroSeek navigation is kind of a nightmare. Like if you just
Yeah.
don't, I always just
Mhm.
type in AstroSeek zodiacal releasing into Google on the page because I'm not trying to.
Navigate all that. It is such a depth of a resource. Oh my
Yeah.
God. But yeah, if you just Google it. So zodiacalreleasing.net is a good one. Astro.com with Hellenistic style, and then AstroSeek are probably your three best options
Mhm.
Yeah.
for taking a look.
And I think those probably go in level of complicated.
Yes,
What is
what
the
I just
word?
said. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 Mhm.
Zodiacal releasing is the easiest to read, I would say.
Yes. Because
Yeah.
my brain was like, I don't understand anything. I am spaghetti. I need
She's
something
sending me
simple.
AstroSeek screenshots. I'm like, oh honey, I have no idea what you're
And
sending
you're
me
like,
right
what am
now.
I looking at? I'm like,
I
it's
need
the
to
timeline of your life.
Oh my God. Okay, great. So I have my lot of air spirit up. All right. Do you want to go first, Anna, or shall I?
Either way, I don't care.
All right. I'll go first because it's a pretty cut and dry. I kept it
Okay.
kind of
I did not.
that's okay.
Sorry.
We are two different people, and that's fine. Okay, so let me just double screen my thing so that I'm probably not going to share my screen. I'll just describe it because it's not really there's nothing really to look at. I
Mhm.
can just tell you. So when I first so for context, my lot of Eros is in Capricorn, so ruled by Saturn. In my ninth house. Austin has his lot of Eros conjunct a lot of spirit in his Sagittarius 11th house. So we have Jupiter and Saturn. So when we met, and of course I didn't write the L1 period because I didn't think that was important, even though it definitely is.
I have yours up. Do you want a lot of arrows?
Yes. Thanks,
Well, it was
Mom.
Kira's out here.
Well, you always start with wherever the lot is. So you would start
Yes.
with Capricorn.
Okay. Yes. So
Then
I'm,
you would move into Aquarius after the 27 years are up, or roughly 27 years.
gotcha. Oh, now I'm like, when do I change? Oh, I changed this year.
Yeah, you
Cute.
already changed.
I already, yay. um, yeah. So we met when I was still in that Aries first house. Oh no, that's Lot of Spirit. Dear God, of mercy. This is how it happens when I start looking at things on my screen. I'm like, hold on, hold on. um,
Okay.
so I
So
was
true.
in the Capricorn L1, um, Leo L2. That was a peak period for me. L3 was Capricorn as well, and Cancer L4, loosing of the bonds,
Mm.
which is where my Venus is placed. So that felt very, very,
Yeah.
and he has a seventh house Leo. So that
Cute.
even felt like that's what I've seen a lot too, is in our zodiacal releasing, certain times we'll have certain signs or houses activated that is important for the other person and maybe not necessarily for myself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really neat.
Yeah.
He was in a let me see, and of course I don't have his up now. He was in a L2 Gemini fifth house period, as well as a L3 Aries, L4 Leo. So those weren't as, oh, Leo, there it is. Oopsie.
Yeah.
His seventh house was activated. So that was very, it felt very real.
Yeah.
The day that so September 8th was a day where we weren't dating yet. We went on a group like hangout, and we both didn't know that we were like strategizing to try and sit next to each other because we had like a little crush on each other. And that was the day that my L4 changed to Leo. So hello, peak period. And then he had a L3 loosing of the bonds in Sagittarius, which activated Spirit and Eros like 3 days
Cute.
prior. So he was, yep. And then his the date itself was during a Capricorn period for him on L4. So I'm like, oh, interesting that for him, my Lot of Eros was
Mm-hmm.
kind of activated. Do you see stuff like that happen?
Yeah, like I have like I don't really normally explore that with clients just because
Yeah,
I'm looking at, I only
that's a
look at
lot.
no,
Yeah.
just because I don't read for like a chart that I don't have consent to read. So I wouldn't look at like a
Yes.
chart unless I had the partner's consent to look at that.
Hmm.
And most people don't know where their partner's Lot of Eros is. It's off the top of their head. You know what I mean? Like the average
Yes.
client has no idea what that is. But like between me and my husband's timing, like yeah, I definitely see
Mm,
happen where we have like things that switch, or definitely even like with transits and stuff. Like I have a story I'll tell later, I think, where yeah, like the rulers of our lots of arrows kind of intertwine, and you can kind of see it show up in different ways. Like in our wedding chart, you could see his lot of arrow stuff show up in a certain way, versus in my timing it showed up in a certain way, and there was kind of all these different things that were pinging for us on different levels, related to the other person's lot of spirit as well, or sorry, lot of arrows.
mm,
Yeah, there is definitely overlap, but I haven't explored it too much in terms of like looking at two people's ZR next to each other and kind of going like, par for par. Cause for some reason I
mhm.
really just like don't look at my husband's chart that much. It's like,
Honestly,
it's just, I don't know why, but like, I think it's because I didn't have it for the first like however many years of our relationship. And then I found a birth certificate at one point. And so then I got it. But like at that point, I don't know. I just felt like it was kind of like, I know you, like, what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I don't know, it's hard to tell me who you are. And so I just kind of like don't normally look at it. And then whenever I do, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like all of this? Like it like, but I don't
Yeah.
even like know everything off the top of my head or anything. So it's a very like detached approach to our own
I love
our
that
own
though.
time.
Everybody is different with it. I feel like for us, well, for me at least, it's definitely been a tool. Because I found astrology at a time where I was like, we had like just gotten engaged and everything, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, this is interesting. Let me actually dive in. So it's been a really cool tool to kind of conceptualize and understand our relationship. And
Yeah.
so he's like my best example. He's my favorite example. Just so much Scorpio. I can't.
Same. I
I
think our
can.
partners have similar charts, don't they?
I think
I think we talked
yes.
about this.
And
Do
Yeah.
they? So
I
then
think s-
would all three of us have similar partners charts? Because
Because my
Wade,
partner also
yeah.
has a Scorpio stellium, Sun, Pluto conjunction, Venus, Jupiter, and Mercury enclosed by the benefics
Oh
in Scorpio.
wow.
So he's very Scorpio.
That
Yeah,
sounds more like Austin than
that's very
Yeah.
Austin.
It's
yeah.
like that
Exactly.
cohort of like what 93. And then I think it repeated in
94.
94 with yeah, both
Yeah,
of the
he's a
members.
94 baby, so he got the
Mhm.
94 iteration.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's whew, I love it. I'm
I
obsessed
do
with it.
too.
I'm obsessed with it. So yeah, there was a lot of activation there. And then that date that kind of like changed everything. He had that loosing of the bonds going on, which I just thought was super fucking cool.
Yeah.
We started dating, let me see, not too so when we started dating, we don't actually remember the day. We were just kind of like in like a week long of 4-hour FaceTimes, and one of those days we were like,
Oh.
what day is it? I'm pretty sure it's either the 13th or the 15th of September, because there was like a new moon that was hitting Venus. There was like all of this stuff going on. So that day it was an L4 Virgo period for me, which was my fifth house.
Oh.
And there's a lot of interesting 12th house activations for both of us as well.
Mm.
He was in a L4, either Capricorn or Aquarius period. So it was either 12th house or first house because it switched.
Mhm.
So that I thought was really interesting. And that comes back later with his when we told people that we got engaged, because we had a whole month after we got engaged that we did not tell people. um so then I thought that was funny that he was in the Capricorn L4 period, his 12th house, when we did tell people, because he's like, man, you may have to face the ending of this isolation.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
hmm
cute.
Yeah.
Of course, things come through.
Yeah. When we finally like made it official, that was another one where he was in a Capricorn and Aquarius period. So another 12th house kind of activation. And it was an L4 Scorpio period for me. So it was a peak 7th house
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then when we got engaged, I love this one because I started a new Sagittarius L2 period on like a month prior. So I was in, which is Austin's Lot of Eros in Spirit. And it's my 8th house. So I'm like,
Mm.
hello.
Merge.
Hello. And we had just moved into a new house, and it was like the day after we moved, and I had already fallen asleep, and he like woke me up. And it was like this very spontaneous thing, but I was on a Sagittarius L2 and L3 period. I was on a Gemini L4 period, which is my second house. So it was very 8th house, second house
Yeah.
activation. And he was in a Virgo L2, which is his 8th house, my
Mm.
5th house, Aquarius
Wow.
on L3, so his first house, and Gemini L4, which is his 5th. So it was like there was 5th house, there was 8th house. Like we were fully just, it was that moment. I thought it was the funniest thing when I saw that. I'm like, wow, that's not
Yeah.
random.
And
Yeah.
also, you've got that really tight like Mercury Eros opposition in your chart too. So the fact you had like
Mhm.
that Gemini period and that Mercurial influence kind of coming in, those aspects are all going to kind of play a
Yeah.
role as well. So
Yeah.
there's definitely something with that there too, I
Yeah.
think.
I definitely love,
Yeah.
like, that's one of my favorite parts of our synastry. We both have mercurial 5th houses, which is like
Mm.
really cool.
Yeah.
And then the mercurial 2-8 opposition, which is,
Yeah.
I like that as well. It's a very unifying like relationship. It's so funny. When I originally looked at our synastry, I was like, oh well, all his shit is in my 7th house. And then I kept looking, I was like, oh my God, there's some aspects here, folks. But then the deeper I go, like there's so much that like ties us together. And for someone like myself who has so much anxiety and insecurity, it's been really like affirming and
Yeah.
encouraging and exciting to see shit like that
Beautiful.
pop up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. There's so
I
much
love
like
that.
that's what's so cool about it is you can see like all of the beauty of the relationship kind of just like laid out before you. And there's something really, just stunning about the way the universe tells that story. Like I think the peak period of my life from spirit, like first from fortune, like L1, 10th from fortune, L2, like the biggest it's ever going to get for me was
Mhm.
when I got married to my husband and when we were like traveling abroad together. And like it's also my peak periods are my happiest moments because I activate both my benefics.
Ah,
And, like it's so cute to just be like, like, I mean, a little bit annoying because like, why are you the most important part of my entire life? But I don't, it's not wrong, but like,
but
speak from spirit was was getting married.
that is so beautiful. Oh
It's
my
cute,
God.
right? And you can see like that show up like that. And it's like, wow, it's almost like the validation for the good stuff in the same way that we talked about the validation for kind of like the rough stuff too. It's like, oh, our love
Yeah.
is that special. I'm not love. Look, it's
I'm
right
not
here.
crazy. That is so sweet. Oh man.
That's so cute. I love it here. Everything's just so sweet.
Everything's so cute. Yeah, go ahead, Anna. That's about my ramble. That was very rambly, but
Oh, okay.
don't forget,
Sorry.
I got the 12th house Mercury today, folks. I'm like,
And Mercury's stationed as hell too. So we're all just doing our best.
oh, it sure is. It sure is.
Yes.
I had so many people the last 2 weeks be like, Hannah, what's happening? Why is nothing working? That was a rough one.
It seemed like really to be affecting people this time around. Like I didn't, and I definitely felt it in some ways. But I feel like people around me that don't normally aren't as tuned in were like, wait, it's Mercury retrograde, right? Like it has to be. And I was like, it's like your intuition. It is coming.
I had a couple friends text me like, is Mercury in Gatorade? And I'm like, it's about to be. It's about to be.
Gonna need to quench that thirst.
Good job. Oh man. All right, Anna, you take it away, gal.
Sorry, I'm pulling up the Lot of Spirit for our wedding day just because I feel like that's relevant and it's real fun how everything it's not fun how everything shook out. So I guess I'm just gonna tell the world I had a really horrible experience planning for my wedding. Everything got really kind of weird and difficult, and it shows up in the Zodiacal releasing, and it's real fun.
It does.
I still had a fantastic wedding day. It was great.
Oh,
Love of my life, all of that good stuff. But it's funny how a lot of our periods changed the day of the wedding, both for Lot of Spirit and for Lot of Eros. So that's real fun. But I'll start from the beginning, I guess.
Start at the very beginning. Okay.
Whenever I met Lane, I was in an L2 Gemini 6th house peak period and an L3 Aqua 2nd house period. And Aquarius is like a theme for our relationship, which makes sense that it's like my hardest part of everything because we've had to put a lot of work into our relationship. It hasn't been like an easy, we instantly met and it was all sunshine and rainbows. But that makes me love it more because it feels like, we've had to put a lot of work into it. So it's something Saturnian and stable.
Yeah.
Malefic relationships.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. And we're also so opposite. Like we have a lot of oppositions in our relationship. So we really had to work that shit out too. But he was in an L2 Aqua 10th house period and loosening of the bonds. He was in an L3 Scorpio 7th house peak period, and it was a culmination when we met. So that's all really cool. That's from Lot of Eros. And then from Lot of Spirit, there was a lot of Scorpio, Cancer, and he was in a loosening of the bonds on L2 and L3 as well from Spirit. So
wow.
Hello.
L2 and L3. It was like we were turning.
It was like
this
is big shit.
Yeah, that's wild. Wow.
And I think it's real fun how it speaks to our desires at that point in time too, because with just where a lot of Eroses are, I should probably say that a lot of Eros is in Aries in my 4th house on my Saturn, and then Lane's is in Leo, and that's y'all's not your 8th house. That's not your 8th house. Where is that? What house is it, Hannah? Because
for what?
You have the same rising. Leo, that's your 4th
house.
Okay, yeah. Sorry. Math. So we both have a lot of Eroses in our 4th houses, which I think is cute and fun and speaks to our relationship and how we both have always wanted like a stable home, So it's just real cute. So anyways, we broke up and then we got back together, and that's a big theme for us as well. But whenever we broke up in college, I was in an L2 Leo 8th house period and an L3 Aqua 2nd house and an L4 Aqua 2nd house. So
all activating your Mars, right? Your malefic contrary to sect if you are in fact with a chart. Yeah.
So it was really like
Mars
This
said
period is
sever.
gonna suck. Yes,
Yeah.
it did say sever. So it was very much like a moving on and becoming our own people. And Lane had a L2 Scorpio 7th house peak, L3 Cancer 3rd house peak, which is his moon,
Whoa.
and L4 Aqua 10th house.
Yeah.
So it was
Wow.
very like Lane's Venus, Mars, and moon were activated with that, and then his 10th house. So
Wow.
Yeah. And I
Mars
think the 10th
said
house,
hi.
it so often shows up as like relationship status changes. That was something that like at lived astrology really brought my attention to, is like transits
Mm,
or in the 10th house can oftentimes speak to someone's like public status changing, whether it be from like in a relationship to single or into married or whatever. So you can also see those kind of activations there. So the fact that he was in that 10th house period too kind of speaks
yeah.
like, status change in terms of like, now I'm single, and like going to be viewed a different way by people.
Yeah,
That's
and
cool.
that makes so much sense because it's like the most visible part of your chart.
Yeah.
So like other people are very aware of what's happening to you at that moment.
Absolutely.
So
And we're so judged oftentimes too by like our partner who we're dating, what our
mhm.
relationship status is, especially if you're single and stuff. So I feel like there's
Yeah.
all those like connotations that kind of get, lumped in there too, that we can kind of
Yeah.
see with 10th house stuff.
Yeah.
Mm.
So when we got back together and I had an L2 Virgo 9th house peak period, L3 Gemini 6th house peak, and L4 Capricorn period that began the day that we got back together. So that's
Wow.
activating my
Saturn
first
ruling or
house.
Saturn right on Eros. Nice.
Yes.
Really
And
believe
Wow.
then
in it.
and then he was in an L2 Capricorn 9th house, which that's where my sun is and my ascendant, and L3 Gemini 2nd house, L4 Sagittarius 8th house, loosening of the bonds. So
Wow.
his loosening of the bonds are just me.
Your power.
Hello.
Hi.
So I think that that's fun that Saturn is again highlighted for us. And then I see a lot that the mutable kind of comes through, and my peaks are in the mutable
Mm,
Mhm.
things. So that's kind
yeah.
of fun.
That's
And then
similar
whenever,
for us. That's
really?
funny that you have this is a theme that Anna and I have with our relationships where like we're flipped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Lane, her husband, has a Taurus rising and a Cancer moon. So like we're very
Right.
similar.
Very similar.
But you said he has fixed peak periods.
Yes.
I
Mhm.
also have fixed peak periods, and then you and Austin both have the mutable ones.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're
That's so
all kind
funny.
of
You're all mirroring
interconnected.
each other.
Mhm.
Yeah. And we all have angle synastry too. So all of us are just
I love
here.
that.
Yeah.
But whenever we got engaged, it was an L1 Gemini peak for me, L2 Gemini peak, L3 Sag peak, L4 Gemini peak. So I
There
was
we go.
peaking on all
Like your
four.
lot of fortune, which sign is it in?
My lot of fortune is in Virgo.
Okay.
Mhm.
Just curious.
Yeah,
Cool.
my ninth house. So the thing that I found funny about the engagement though is I was like, okay, well, Lane wasn't in peaks as much whenever it was the day of the engagement, but then I was looking back and I was like, oh shit, he was in a peak whenever he bought the ring and was like planning the
Oh, yeah. So
engagement.
you
There
see
we
it show
go.
up for different ways for different people, for sure.
Yeah. And I thought it's really cool how that ties back into the idea of like when your desires are playing out. So it's kind
Mm,
of like when we were each having the most active part of this whole thing happening, you know. So when he was
Yeah.
planning, he was on an L2 aqua peak, L3 aqua peak, L4 aqua peak, and completion period
whoa.
from the previous thing.
And where's his lot of fortune?
His lot of fortune, let me see. Sorry, I have it.
It's
It's in Leo.
so same.
Okay. I was
So his
curious because
10th
like for
house.
you had all those Gemini ones. So you would have been in major peaks, like 10th from
Mhm.
fortune is like as big as it gets, 10th and
Mm-hmm.
first. And so I
Yeah.
was curious if his were also 10th, but if it was opposing, those are like moderate and the other one
Mm-hmm.
is minor.
Yeah. Well,
But cool.
his 10th house is Aquarius though, so
Oh, okay.
it's
So
activating his 10th
yeah, that
house.
visibility stuff. Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
That's
And then
funny.
it's also my stellium, so it feels like a whole
Your Venus, yeah.
it's us.
Very cute.
And then the date of the engagement, Lane was in an L2 Aqua 10th house peak, L3 Pisces 11th house period, so activating his Saturn, and an L4 Gemini period. So it felt like Lane was kind of assuming the responsibility of marriage
Mm,
because he takes it really seriously, and like being a stable husband is a really big deal for him.
mm.
So that kind of feels tied in. And then the
And
day
thinking
of,
about like the 11th house being like hopes and dreams, and he was probably just like really hoping you were gonna say yes, and it was all gonna
yes.
My
cow,
heart.
like you being like his dream.
Well, Lane's also that person. His mom told me one time that whenever Lane was like 8, maybe, he was like, Mama, I just really want a wife. Like, I really want to get married. So it's something that has been a dream of his since he was a little
Scorpio
boy.
Venus in the
God,
7th
that's
house.
I
like 10 times cuter. That is so adorable. You're like the childhood dream is
know. Yes.
literally manifesting right in front of his
I'm
eyes.
crying.
Yes, it's so cute.
That's
So the
adorable.
day of our wedding, I was in an L2 Cancer 7th house period, which is Lane's moon, and then an L3 and L4 Leo 8th house period. So, and then that would be the fixed periods that are being activated. And then Lane was
Mhm.
in an L2 Aqua 10th house, L3 Sag 8th house, L4 Cancer 3rd house.
Wow.
So lots of
Moons
moon.
and 8th house shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like we are sharing resources and emotional security and all of
Yes.
those good
I
things.
love that.
Yes.
I
That's
love that.
super cool.
And then the fixed house activations feel relevant for the fact that like my mom didn't come to our wedding and stuff, so it was kind of like a weird turbulence, so it did feel like that fixed axis was activated a little bit with some of the hard
You have
shit coming in.
your Jupiter there too, don't you?
In
So
Aquarius, yeah.
yeah, so you have your benefic sect and your malefic contrary sect getting activated at the same time, which
Yeah.
tends to bring
Mm.
about situations that are both like highly favorable and highly challenging, and they usually have like elements of both.
That's my
So
life.
that kind of being like, yeah, like a really, huge moment that was
Mhm.
very benefic. You're getting married to the love of your life, but having like all of the stuff kind of going on in the background with like your family.
Yeah.
That's like a really good kind of example of how like having a benefic and malefic contrary to sect activated at the same time can
Hmm.
play
Mm.
out. Not to use your life experience as
No, it's good.
example, but
I'm like
This is what we
removed
do.
from it. I think the astrology helps me create space where it doesn't feel emotional as much. So I don't mean to like dump
Aquarius things,
dump
I
hard things.
understand.
Yeah.
Aquarius.
It's all of my experiences are just experiences. So
Exactly.
it's like,
Yep.
it happened. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
There's
yeah.
just so many ways it can show up. Like I have, like looking at my wedding chart, which was completely unelected, like before I ever knew about astrology. We got married with a Libra rising, a full moon in a full moon in Libra.
Oh,
And my husband's lot of Eros is in Aries. And so his lot of Eros fell in the 7th house of that chart. But what was always so funny to me was that there's a Mars Saturn conjunction in Capricorn, 1 degree, Mars applying to Saturn,
wow.
like in the 4th house of that chart. And we both have like pretty difficult upbringing. So I was always like, oh, it
Mm-hmm.
just speaks to like our difficult family stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I was doing the prep for this episode, I was like diving into my own lot of Eros more and just kind of like exploring it. And mine is it's in Capricorn. And so my lot of Eros is ruled by Saturn. My husband's is ruled by Mars. I'm a Aquarius stellium, so
Wow.
ruled by Saturn. He's a Scorpio stellium, ruled by Mars. And
Wow.
it was on the and Mars was on the exact degree of my lot of Eros at the time. And so we literally got married on like a Mars Saturn conjunction, yes, but like malefic relationship vibes with like, malefic ruled lot of Eroses. It was exactly on mine. His was in the 7th house of the wedding chart. Like it was so good. I was
Wow.
That's so
blown away when I
perfect.
discovered that. Yeah.
I
I
love
feel
that.
Hannah and I have talked about that before, where she's been sending some charts and stuff just to kind of like filter through what could be possible dates.
Oh yeah.
And it feels very like there are some charts that get pulled where it's like, wow, this for anybody else would absolutely be wild and suck. But then, for certain people, when it goes back to your natal, it's kind of like, oh, that makes perfect sense that this would
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like even stuff that like I, as an electional astrologer, would never, ever
Hmm.
give a client that chart. A full moon, like already, like to the
Immediately
degree.
no.
Immediately no, to the degree. And then I was both malefics angular. You want them
Mm-mm.
conjoined within 1 degree. Okay, like I would never client. And Mercury was retrograde, of
Oh,
course.
wow.
Was
Wow.
all hell. Like, well, I have Mercury RX in my natal chart as well, so it's it
It works
links
out.
But like, I would never give that to anybody. And like, I look at it, I'm like, this is a horrible chart, but like a beautiful marriage, like so happy, you know, like truly both benefics in the seventh house, like it is my happy place for sure, you know?
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
think it's so funny how sometimes you just have to dig a little deeper. Cause like, I did not understand that Mars Saturn conjunction. I tweeted about this the other day, the tweet like popped off. I was just like,
I saw, yeah.
elegant, you know, like, and it was when I discovered this, I was like, ah, sometimes you just really don't realize like what it's saying until you come back and look at it later and you're like, oh, because we're a malefic love affair, obviously.
Yes.
No, it's so cute. It's so cute.
Yeah.
That's awesome. We had Moon Saturn in our chart for the wedding. It was like a Moon Saturn opposition for when we were getting married, but it made a lot of sense because it felt like our whole relationship was kind of like this forbidden love type vibe, and that just feels very Moon Saturn.
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. And that just reaching almost like a peak at that point, being like, no, it's, you know, out in the open, full visible.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's definitely been the journey with us. Like, I mean, even when we started dating, I look back at it, I'm like, oh my God, we started dating during a Venus retrograde, but he has Venus retrograde natally.
Yep. There you go.
So it's like, yeah.
How did I not notice that?
There's have you ever zoomed in on the Scorpio and went through each individual planet? No, because there's a
No.
lot.
I'm more just kind of like, oh wow, that's a lot of Scorpio.
Yeah.
Exactly. I
It's just
I
all
love
there.
it. I love it so much. Yeah, and like some of the charts we've been looking at, which I'm gonna need your help with, friend. For our wedding, like I've been looking at
Yes.
ones that have like a Scorpio moon, which traditionally like, but for us and our charts and like where
Yeah.
the moon will be with my North Node and my seventh house and his Venus and everything, I'm like,
It activates a lot of good things for you guys.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we eloped and then we came back and got like officially married, you know, like signed papers and stuff like a couple months later. And when we signed papers, the moon was in Scorpio, but it was like conjunct Jupiter at the time and in the first. And
Oh,
That's cool.
great. Like I love like a moon.
I love that.
What I mean, moon Jupiter and Scorpio conjunction the first, like that's nice. And like with it's, you know, he's a Scorpio, everything. So it makes sense. And like that's why sometimes, you know, you see elections that are just like, why does this a seemingly horrible thing work for this person? It's like because it works for that person in their chart, you know, and like their
Yeah.
own dynamics. And not everybody needs a super benefic trinity like you know, marriage. And like the people that are meant to have that experience will, and the ones that aren't are meant to have, you know, squares and oppositions and work through the tough shit. And that's a part of it too. And there's nothing wrong or better about one or the other, you know?
True.
That
I
always
love
comes back. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, I love that we have Mars and Jupiter co-present in our marriage chart as well because I have them conjunct in my natal chart. So it just feels like, of course.
It's so cute. Like it's just so elegant. Like it just, you know, like it's never not mind-blowing to see that like play out that way, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you didn't elect your wedding chart, Anna, and then you're sending it to me and
No.
Ryan, and we're like,
I
are you
was like-
kidding me?
Well, because we were just trying to
It was
pick
so
dates
good.
that we liked, and
Yeah.
we were initially going to get married on 5/7 of 22 because it's my favorite number is 7 and his is 5, but then it just didn't work out, and so we chose July 2nd because it was 222, and I was like, that's cute. And then it just worked out that the chart was what it was, and I didn't even think about astrology while I was picking the date.
July
Weirdly,
2nd of this year.
so
Oh,
we
that was
just got
nice.
married. So it was.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was like, I know I used like the July 4th election for like a million things. So I know I'm familiar with what was going on at that time.
Yeah. Which another weird thing too is that so our marriage license, we were supposed to have it signed during the ceremony so that it would have been like right the election was locked tight.
Once we do it all.
Right. But then it didn't work out that way and it got signed a couple of days later. So I think it was either the 3rd or the 4th that it actually got signed. And so our legal marriage is different than our spiritual
ceremony.
Marriage. Yeah. And so it's kind of like that Moon Saturn was separating a little bit more where it was applying whenever we did our actual ceremony.
That chart was I'm not like when I saw like the July 4th chart, I was like, this is the best chart for the rest of the year, hands down. So if that was like the day you got married, like I gave that election to so many people. I was like, please use this. Like,
Please use this.
All
I
we
remember,
have for the rest of the year. Like, please go forth, put out your projects,
do your
be
thing.
successful.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Because
I was like,
so
what a
distressed.
fruitful day.
I was like, Hannah, oh my God, this is so horrible. They're not gonna match. It's gonna be the worst thing ever. And then she was like, Anna, the astrology is so good. Chill
I'm like,
out.
it's fine. It's no matter. I was like, dude, no matter what time you get, like, I'm pretty sure it's gonna be like, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think they both matter. You know what I mean? They both speak to like different like aspects of the relationship. And but yeah, that July 4th chart was what I used for those Zodiacal releasing lectures. So there you go, you know.
It was great. I was thinking about that actually when I was watching that. I'm like, I wonder when she recorded this. I know she elected it.
Oh, recorded? Oh my God. I re-recorded that thing like so many times. Because
really?
like I'm Brennan. I am not a bald man who can wear the same shirt every day. And I wish I was. It would make it better. But like I'm like the type of person like I have to do it in one sitting and to like sound like I know what I'm talking. I've got Mercury retrograde and combust. Like I don't know what I'm saying ever, you know. It's had to redo it so many times before I was like, okay, like I can't sit here for another 2 hours and talk about this again. Like this is all like this is as good as it's gonna be.
That is so funny.
Well, I think it was fantastic. Like it didn't sound like you had any issues at all.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. It was an effort to record, so I appreciate it.
Oh my God. Yeah, no, it was well done. All right. I'm trying to think. Any last thoughts on Zodiacal releasing, Spirit Eros, anything?
I feel like we covered so much. I feel like this was such a good conversation. I feel like we've given the people a lot to listen to.
Agreed. Definitely agreed. If you guys have any questions about Zodiacal releasing or the Lots of Spirit Eros, whatever, feel free to hit us up on Twitter. Or Kira is a wonderful resource. Even just following her. She has so many offerings on her website that we'll definitely include in the show notes so you guys can find her easily. Speaking of which, where can they generally find you, Kira?
Yeah, like everything you just said. Twitter is where I'm most active on Twitter, which is just Kira Astrology, like astrology, but with KIR in front of it. And my website is just my name, KiraRyberg.com, and you can find everything there basically for booking, lectures.
You can find the lecture that we've been talking about on her website.
Yeah, we'll include that link down below as well. Thank you so much, Kira, for being here today. This was such a rich and exciting conversation we've all been anticipating for such a long time.
Yeah,
because we're all so excited about this topic.
I know. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Anna, where can the people find us?
They can find us at Primordial Threads on Twitter and on YouTube, but it's THRDS on Twitter.
Because it was too long.
It was too long. We really thought that we had it airtight and we were like, yes, this is the perfect name. And then we forgot about the character restriction.
I didn't know there was a character restriction.
The name is so good. So it's worth it. You know, the people should make the extra effort.
Yes.
We should petition Twitter to have longer character names. They should be able to be 18, you know. That's how I feel.
I agree. It's fine.
Once you guys are big enough, you know, we'll just call up Twitter and be like, hey,
hello, Twitter.
Know,
this is
do
me.
us a solid, please. And we'll see. Like, we never know.
You'll never know.
Where can they find you, Hannah?
Oh, you can find me at Astrology on Twitter and Instagram. And Anna is at Sappy Saturnian. I'm doing it for you because I care about you.
I didn't say. I think because I went so far into the Primordial Threads, I forgot that I didn't say mine.
It's okay. We always link it anyway. This has been great. Thank you so much again, Kira. And we will catch everybody next time.
Bye.
Bye.